If you care about the future of Britain's towns and cities, and we know that many of you do, here's something rather special.
This summer, the Create Streets Foundation, of whom we are great fans, is running its urban design and architecture summer school in the beautiful market town of Sherborne in Dorset.
It's a short residential course that teaches something surprisingly rare in modern architectural education: how to design places that people actually love.
Across a few intensive days, you'll learn the fundamentals of creating traditional streets, mixed-use neighbourhoods, and buildings that sit comfortably in their landscape.
You will sketch, walk the town, study real sites, and work in small teams to develop a concept master plan, guided by leading practitioners in urban design and architecture.
Applications are now open. Just search Create Streets Summer School or visit createstreetsfoundation.org.uk.
Listeners, welcome back to the Anglofuturism podcast. And Calum and I have a rather special interview for you. In fact, I'd like to refer to a text from a listener, and she...
Hear that, listeners? We have been recently the beneficiaries of a large surge in female listeners. So this, if you are a male listener, you are welcome. But if you are a female listener, you are extremely welcome. And now making up as much as 18% of our listeners.
Is it 18? Or it could be one day.
Tom, this is what in the VC world you call a sort of pre-stating your situation. You hyperstition something into reality by claiming it to be so. But of course, you're just sort of a month away from building that actual feature. So us building bridges out to the female community is an inevitability once we gain traction.
Jam tomorrow. But this female listener said of our interviewee, Katie Lamb, of whom she and others is a big fan, ultimate goal is to transition the laminators, that's her name for...
the fan club.
Yeah. Ultimate goal is to transition the laminators into a coterie of female bodyguards, Gaddafi style.
It's definitely an intriguing image. Didn't Gaddafi, he insisted on various privileges for his bodyguards.
Oh, really? I also don't think it ends very well for Gaddafi.
Well, it was because he didn't have his bodyguards. When he was pulled out of the drainage tunnel, he was not surrounded by a corps of rifle-wielding laminators who could have otherwise kept him safe.
What might have been. But look, why are the laminators excited about Katie Lamb?
The possibility of a renewed Tory party. They think that if the Tory party is to continue to exist, which many people think that the crimes of the 14 years, the lost 14 years, the 14 years of humiliation, if they can ever be overcome, it will be through Katie Lamb, who does not talk like a typical Tory.
No, she's very robust about immigration and the grooming gangs.
And at the same time, is not a sort of tweed-wearing, elbow patch Tory boy. I did at times even find myself thinking, that as the words welled up in my throat, the accusation, should I say, wig.
You accused me of being a wig.
I did accuse you of being a wig.
You were more respectful towards Katie.
Well, what would happen is she would say something particularly wiggish, and I would sort of feel it welling up again, and then she'd sort of tack back in.
But we were asking her about basically her vision of the future of the country, the role of the state, how we might develop our ability to produce energy on these islands, the future of British life, conservatism. We threw a few questions about space exploration to her as well.
Tom, listeners, Tom at this point was like a sort of Labrador whose owner is holding the tennis ball in front and making sort of throwing motions and sort of almost vibrating with excitement as he posed these questions. It was sort of like a man sort of patting himself on the back so hard he sprains his shoulder.
I was trying to throw the ball for myself. I fear. So listeners, you will have to carry on with this episode to see whether Katie Lamb could be drawn to tear up Conservative policy and declare an ambition to put a man on the moon by the end of the next parliamentary term.
Well, and whether she will be the second MP. I was going to say Tory MP, but that's no longer true. Who declares themselves to be an Anglo-futurist?
But although of course she has the measures delivery of a politician, couldn't you just tell that she was foaming internally at the mouth to send Anglo-futurists to Antarctica?
Modern linguists have reconstructed Proto-Indo-European from the fragments of all the different languages, reconstructing what is common to them, producing the language.
Stop producing high quality. Erin's going to be tempted to use it.
Of the
Erin, do not use
the
this.
steppe peoples. Katie Lamb, dressed in waxed cotton.
Cut.
Must be considered. The original chariot riding, milk drinking, Indo-Vedic sky father worshipping
The Beaker HCPG.
I fear, Tom, you were editorializing somewhat.
All right, you'll have to make your own minds up. On with the show.
Who now has anything to say about the deindustrialization of this country?
Georgian townhouses on the moon.
The highest GDP per capita in the Milky Way.
Small modular reactors under every village green.
This is Anglo-futurism.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the King Charles III Space Station. I'm Calum Drysdale.
I'm Tomo. Listeners, welcome. Now, with us, we have Katie Lamb, a Tory MP from the 2024 intake. She's also worked in finance, in Number 10, and for the AI company Faculty.
She's a rising star in British politics and is in fact rising so steeply that she's been able to join us today in low Earth orbit. Katie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's great to have you. And we're not going to ask you about the politics of the day. We're more interested in the Britain you'd like to see 50 or 100 years from now. Easy question to kick off with. Can you describe it to us?
Well, it's easy in some ways and challenging in others, because I think what's so exciting about the future is that it can't really be predicted. So there are kind of themes and vibes that you could imagine that you would want the country to have in 50 and 100 years' time. But the exciting thing will be finding out what the British people, who are, I think, uniquely innovative and kooky in their own way and enterprising, will come up with in the next 50 or 100 years. But what I very much hope is that the Britain of 50 years' time, of 100 years' time, of 5 years' time is a place that embraces change, possibility, potential, in a way that preserves all of the things that make this country such a wonderful place to live, but that take us towards making it a wonderful place to live for another 2 millenniums, as it has been. And I think that there will be all sorts of different elements to that. It will be being and remaining and becoming even more so one of the best places in the world to do the entirety. I was going to say to do science, which sounds really basic, but to discover new things. I think that is one of the great gifts that the British people have to give the world in general is we are fantastic inventors. We're very good at looking things in a slightly different way from the way that everybody else does or the way that they've been looked at before. We are a pretty pragmatic people. And so we're also pretty good at not just coming up with ideas, but coming up with things that make life better. We are maybe less good at monetizing that. Our American friends are particularly gifted in that area. But my hope is that the Britain of 50 to 100 years' time broadly kind of works well, that you can do all of the things that you need to do to go about your daily life in peace and comfort, and that it's an exciting, innovative, sparky place to be.
It does feel like there's a lot up for grabs at the moment, insofar as we're on a trajectory towards, I suppose, deepened penury and worsened sectarianism, and yet technology is advancing so fast that maybe there are a lot of opportunities on the table if only we take them quickly before the creation of the permanent underclass.
I think the prize is massive in sorting out some of the things in this country that are not going very well. Catch-up growth is real. Our economy has lagged for quite some time. I think real wages are basically flat on 2007. I believe the last time the economy really, really grew, by which the metric that I'm going to take for that is GDP per capita of 2% a year for 2 consecutive years. I think the last time we did that was 99, 2000. You'd need to be 50, coming up to 50, to have lived and worked in an economy like that if you're a Brit. But we can definitely make up that gap, and the prospect of doing so is incredibly exciting.
You say catch-up growth. I'm sort of forced to ask, America is probably the example of a country that has recovered better from the financial crisis, but other countries around the world are struggling and actually suffering many of the same problems, right? The one that we are. So, an aging population, a sort of increasing distrust of liberal capitalism, and increased sectarianism, largely through immigration. Do any of these to you strike as sort of the thing that can prevent that future happening? Like, what are the obstacles and the blockers?
There are several. One is a continuation of the sclerotic state, is maybe one way to describe it. So unless we really quite seriously reimagine and rewire what government does, what the state is here to do, then we are going to continue to make it almost impossible, really meaningfully, to grow the economy. And you rightly say that lots of countries in the world are struggling with this, and they are. In many ways, there are various European countries who are in a situation that's worse than our own. They're even more regulated than we are. They're even more interventionist than we are. The government does even more things to an even lower standard. But it doesn't have to be this way. And whilst the process of making that change will be a lot of work, like I say, the prize is very great.
It must have been a bit of a shock arriving in Westminster after working in the private sector for faculty, which has now been sold for quite a lot of money. Very good.
Yes.
Very,
yeah,
very,
Are we happy about that?
We're happy for Mark.
We're happy for Mark, but selling off the family silver across the Atlantic.
I don't know.
That was our sort of pride. We were very excited. It was the AI company of Britain, and then all of a sudden, he's gone off and sold to the boring AI company in America.
Couldn't possibly comment on Mark, Anglo Futures podcast interviewee emeritus. But the question remains. It must have been a bit of a culture shock coming to Westminster. I suppose on the outside you're like, why is it so sclerotic? Like, this must be what is going wrong? And then I suppose you get steeped in it, and perhaps you understand better the reasons for the sclerosis.
Well, I went in and out. So I worked in finance for the bulk of my career, and then I worked in Number 10, and then I worked at faculty, and then I worked in the Home Office. So I sort of did my immersion therapy twice. The main thing that I found depressing, truthfully, when I was in government is it is just less than the sum of its parts. You might be working with a team and think, well, everybody in this team is pretty bright, is pretty aligned, everybody knows what it is we're supposed to be doing. And yet here we are at the end of another week, having made no progress on where we were at the end of last week. And a lot of that is just the friction in the whole system, like just urgency and agency just kind of drain away the longer that you spend working for the government in many different teams and areas and roles. There are lots of very, very brilliant civil servants. There are a few, but it's far fewer than the cliche would imply, who are genuinely obstructive, who actually think, I'm not going to do this because I don't agree with it. Most people who work in the civil service, the overwhelming majority of people who work in the civil service, are not like that. But the system internally is a bit like the way the system functions externally, which is there are many, 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 many people who can say no. And all of those people are incentivized to be risk averse. And there are very few people who can say yes. And those people, unfortunately, are also often incentivized, or at least incentivized in the short term, to be risk averse. And so the cumulative effect of all of that is a system that just ends up not achieving very much, and certainly not achieving what it could achieve. And I think the only way that you can, well, there's different elements to how you would properly tackle that, but one of them is just to do quite a lot less. There are so many, any department at any one time will have so many top priorities. It's become a bit of a cliche, and I saw somebody the other day online doing a list of all of the things that Keir Starmer has said are his number one priority. It's like 25 things. And that's kind of writ large across government. It's like, well, we have to do all of these things because they are all the top priority. But of course, if everything is your top priority, nothing is your top priority, and none of those things are ever going to get done.
So what are we going to cut then?
Yeah, we played with Dan Tomlinson, a game of Sacred Cows,
where we lead into this. We've now moved, actually, listeners, into the King Charles III space station abattoir. We lead a cow in.
The sacred cow comes lumbering in, and you have to decide whether or not to kill it.
Well, I think in practice, it's a lot less like that, and it's a lot more boring, honestly. It's lots of tiny decisions that you would have to make all the time. So there were, when I worked in the Home Office, the comms department, for example, was constantly running campaigns on various different things. And there was no evidence that these might actually make any difference. So there was a big campaign, I think it was called Enough, that was supposed to dissuade people from domestic violence, basically, which is obviously a very noble cause, which is the problem with all of these things, is they are all to an aim that we can all subscribe to. But there's no evidence that might work. So there are hundreds of thousands of things like that going on in government all the time. There are thousands of teams that were started, particularly the Cabinet Office is especially bad for this, but not uniquely so. You'd come across teams and you'd be like, what do these guys even do? And they were just started by a minister in the coalition government, and now they do, I'm making this up, but they do like banking access equality or whatever. It's like 10 people doing this all day, every day. And actually, it's really easy to get and set up a bank account, and we probably just don't need a team of civil servants doing that. And if it was ever a problem, it should have been set up in such a way where once the problem was dealt with, the team was closed. But that never happens. It's all a ratchet, right? It's always more. So the sacred cow model is obviously a bit more fun conversationally, but the practice of it is really dull. It's literally just like line by line. What does this team do? Do we still need them to do that? Does anybody need to do that? And there have also been incidents and phases where the ratchet has gone up a lot. So Brexit was one and COVID was one. So in the pandemic, I worked in the business team in Number 10, and the wedding venue sector had basically never really had a relationship with government because it didn't really need one. It was just living its life, hosting people's weddings. Great, we love that. But during the pandemic, of course, all of these sectors were closed. And so somebody thought, we should have a wedding venue association. And then the wedding venue association gets set up. And then the head of the Wedding Venue Association is lobbying the business department for there to be a sort of point person on wedding venues. And then the business department sets up the wedding venues team, or maybe actually it was DCMS because it sits between the two, which is another problem. And then after the pandemic, nobody says, oh, well, job done. We can close the Wedding Venues Association now, and we can close the team that deals with wedding venues. That just exists into perpetuity.
The barnacle is encrusted onto the hull of the state forever.
Indeed.
Another barnacle.
Well, it doesn't have to be forever, but certainly...
It's funny you say barnacle, because that is actually the name of the family that runs the circumlocution office in Little Dorrit. Is this family of civil servants.
It was on the tip of my tongue.
They're called the barnacle. So, no, Tom, you have the makings of a Dickens yourself. But I think it's important to say this happened during a Tory period in power, right? The 14 years, the wasted 14 years.
It's happened for a very long time under governments of all different stripes.
But why has that I think it's Kirsty Arvin has the line of Cthulhu always swims to the left. That the nature of government is that you will always pick up more functions. It's a natural power accumulating instrument. You've talked about cutting this all back, but lots of people have talked about making the state smaller, and it seems that is a sort of insufficient diagnosis, that you can't just say it must be, let's just go and fix it, because has that ever happened?
Well, it has happened to a degree, not to the degree that I'm talking about. Between 2010 and 2015, if you measure it by the number of civil servants, the state actually did get
That was
smaller.
a very bad way of doing it, wasn't it? Because they froze hiring, which meant that you lost a lot of your best performers. You did it through churn. Then you got all your grade inflation, so you got jobs reclassified up to higher values.
And a lot of austerity was about doing more with less rather than doing less.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So that's obviously different. But the alternative, or I suppose the terminus of what you're saying, is because it's never been done, it can't be done. But that's just not true.
No, my question
though,
is: does the public even actually want it? That actually most people like it when the government does things for them, and everyone is a conservative about their own area. The wedding venues sector, I'm sure, would love the state to be cut elsewhere, apart from the wedding venues team, right?
Well, two different points on that. Firstly, I think the evidence is basically that the public does want it. As in, if you take polling to be evidence of what people want, people think that the state is too big and that taxes are too high, and the two things are obviously intimately related. But secondly, the case for doing it is not just an ideological one, though, of course, that would be what lots of people of my political persuasion would believe in. It is a moral imperative because the state doesn't work very well. And what I hear all the time from my constituents and from people in general that I speak to is whatever arm of the state they have been interacting with has let them down. And one of the key reasons for that is because the state is just far too big. And I think the version of this, which is, it is in the abstract intellectually bad for the government to run lots of things, so we're going to cut down the state, probably would fail. But the version that is, the moral imperative is for this system to work. It cannot work at this size. We can only do these things, and we will attempt to do them well. I think not only would work, but is really part of and should be the raison d'etre of the Conservative Party. If that argument cannot be made and won by the Conservatives when the state is as large and as poorly functioning as it is now, then that will be a real failure.
I just think though that your example there of people interact with people can't get a driving license. Their answer is not we should get rid of driving licenses. Their answer is I want a more effective and probably larger, more well-manned, well-funded. What is it?
VLA.
DVLA. Yeah, exactly.
But in order to do that, you are going to have to do less of something else.
Sure, but has that argument been made to the public?
Well, I mean, I think it is being like that's kind of the discussion that we're having now, isn't it? That is the argument that is being made, and that I think, in effect, the Conservative Party exists to make. Like one of the functions of the Conservative Party for the country should be the people who make that argument, and in the context that we're in at the moment, where I think it's so obviously true, win it.
And do you think the Tories will always make that argument better than Reform?
I do, because I think in the end it has to be a properly planned and detailed argument for the reasons that we're talking about, right? It's not enough to say this would be better, because once you get in there, inertia is incredibly powerful within the state. So the two, it's not necessarily literally the case, although in a lot of the time it is, but it's not always literally the case that civil servants are sort of left-wing per se. It's that the civil service as a machine is very statist, which is a kind of self-selection thing, right? The people who work for the state are more likely to be people who think that the state is the answer, no matter what the question was. And secondly, the machine as a whole is incredibly orientated towards inertia. And if you're going to overcome that, you have to do it in a very detailed, very, very specific way. There are some big things that are essentially kind of superfluous to requirements, but there are also lots of things where the solution for that part of the state won't necessarily be doing less immediately, like the armed forces, for example, right? Like you gave the driving license as example, but our armed forces are almost certainly, well, they are underpowered relative to what they would need to be for a country of for what they should be for a country of our size and wealth, given the context that we find ourselves in globally. But if we're going to do that properly, unless we want to tax the economy to the point where it will literally just fall to its knees, we are going to have to do less of lots of other things. But a lot of those things will just be really, really, really dull. And to your question about Reform versus the Conservatives, my worry with Reform is that it will be a lot of kind of headline, this would be a good idea. And that's effectively, to what you were saying earlier, what the Conservatives kind of already tried in government. Like there were lots of people in previous Conservative administrations that did, in theory, want to do less and slim things down and make them better. But you actually have to be really very well prepared for what that will look like in practice, because it's hard, because the system resists.
I suppose there's an underlying question here of what the state is for, and implicitly Labour's belief that the state is there to please stakeholders and give up freebies until the taxpayers scream very loudly. But this has not always been the case regarding the state. I think we can think of examples of where states have kind of fostered great deeds on behalf of the country. So like the Apollo missions, for instance. This is not the kind of thing that you can envisage like the current Westminster state overseeing today.
No.
No. Well, I mean, there's a question here. Like, what is the state for? Should we be the leading question, but I think the state should be helping us strive for greatness. I would like to see a much increased space program, for instance. I suppose my question in a nutshell is, when would you like an Englishman to be on the moon?
I think the state should be helping us strive for greatness. Unfortunately, there is an interim stop, which is helping us not be rubbish, is the only phrasing I can think of, which is not very eloquent. But, there are the most basic functions that the state exists to perform. The kind of monopoly on violence and the police and the armed forces and defence and the border are probably the three most obvious ones that pretty much have to happen on some kind of governmental level, and almost every nation or civilization has had some version of those throughout history. If you're not even clearing that bar, you are not going to be putting together the Apollo missions, right? So one doesn't want to be unambitious about what the state could achieve. But I think it has to be kind of clearing the bar of, is it actually doing all of the basic functions that it needs to do first? And that's not where we are on basically any of those.
Tom, you're revealing really your Whiggish sensibilities here. That actually, Tom, you would like a big state as long as it did the things that you wanted.
Yeah, no, I'm like
to
everyone
do.
else. I want the state to be there to kind of foster my oddball projects.
Well, which Katie brings me around maybe to the question of, do you still think of yourself as a conservative in the sense that there exists a Britain, an England that you seek to preserve? Because actually, admittedly, you've said some things about, stepping back, but a functioning state is in many ways an activist state. It's one that intervenes in people's lives and tries to guide them towards greatness. How do you feel about? Do you not think that sort of the sort of million radicals thought that the real ability of the state or the opportunity of the state was that it could go into people's lives and it could fix their problems for them and allow them to be greater?
Does that ever really work? I suppose it depends on the type of problem. If their problem is that they've broken their leg, maybe. But to answer the first part of your question, absolutely. I think it is the parody of conservatism, or the way that it can descend into cliche, is thinking that kind of nothing can ever change, and that's not conservatism. Conservatism is understanding what is most precious and preserving that and allowing everything else to change that would need to change in order for that to be saved and held and kept. And in this country, in Britain and in England, so much of that is what we were talking about at the beginning, which is the innovative, slightly countercultural sometimes, quirky way that its people think. And that is exactly the kind of thing that a government and a state can never plan, can't control, can't arrange, should, at its best, be able to minimize the frictions on people's lives to allow them to do that. So that might be getting around in public transport. It might be staying healthy and fixing your broken leg. But I think the idea that any government could do any kind of central planning if what you're looking to do is do new things and exciting things and innovative things, there is almost no evidence, basically, that has ever worked.
But what about setting the tone aesthetically? I mean, think of the Palace of Westminster. So there's like beautiful Pugin building that I think set the tone architecturally for the buildings around it. Compare that to the plans for the overhaul today, where every new addition is uninspiring, and to me, this says that sometimes a kind of government hand on the tiller, even in the world of aesthetics, can be quite useful.
But on the current plans, also the government hand on the tiller.
I think you could say that, but I'm saying the hand on the tiller could have a good or a bad effect, as with any hand on any tiller.
What the government can do at its best that kind of nobody else can is essentially vibes. And it's difficult because you can't only do the vibes, right? You can't just have the vibes and not back it up with real action. But if you take something like, if you take the economy and growth and the importance thereof, what governments can do in a way that nobody else can is say to the people, what real political leadership can do is say to the people, we believe in ambition, we believe in being bold and brave and trying things. We understand that success only comes through failure, that winning only comes through losing, that there will be lots of rounds of whatever it is you're going to try, and not all of them will work. And then there are all sorts of policy ways that you actually enact that, whether that's through the tax system or through the regulatory system, or you have to back that up with something. But whether the general atmosphere is one of ambition and striving and boldness and excitement, or it's one of management and risk aversion and risk elimination, which ultimately, this is how risk and reward works, right? If you eliminate risk, in the end, you will also eliminate reward. Deciding where we are on that kind of spectrum and how that feels as people go about their day-to-day lives is something that the government can do and should do. It's not enough. You've got to back it up, like I say, with the requisite policies. But that is certainly something that I think if the government were functioning well, it would do. Whereas I think I was thinking this earlier when you were asking about the role of the state and how the left sees the state. I mean, my sense of this government is they basically think that everything is a job for the government unless you can prove that it's not, rather than what I think, which is literally the opposite of that. So in the first budget, in Rachel Reeves's first budget, she stood up and said, a strong private sector depends on a strong public sector. And what I believe is completely the opposite. If the public sector shut down tomorrow, the private sector would find a way still to exist as commerce and commercial activity has for thousands of years. If the private sector shut down tomorrow, then the country would grind to a halt immediately, not least because there would be no money. There is no wealth other than the wealth that is created in the private sector. Everybody else just moves it around. So I think that is just a totally fundamental difference of how we look at the world.
I wonder, you've said there about the ability of a government to lead and to change the way that people think. And in some ways that is that's quite a left-wing position, right? That it's a common refrain among sort of particularly the pro-Gaza people that the sort of pro-immigration activists, that if the Prime Minister could just stand up and show leadership and declare that this is right, that would lead to a swing. I don't
think you can change the way that people think.
Well, this was going to be my question.
What I'm talking about is allowing people to be the way that they already are.
But do you not think actually that potentially we have the government we deserve now? In that maybe, is it true that either the British people have become more risk averse and more moralising and more kind of restrictive in their attitudes, i.e., there was polling around people, something like 20% of people wanted lockdowns to continue forever, that they didn't like people going out to nightclubs and things. And then there's flip side of that as well, or second part of that is large-scale immigration has meant that there are people who don't necessarily have the same attitudes, right? Do we still have a country, do you think, that is capable of greatness? Or it's people desire greatness?
The short answer is yes, definitely. And in defence of the British people, I don't know that they have been offered the option. I mean, when you're always going to get, the British people is not a monolith, right? You're always going to get all sorts of different people with all sorts of different views when you're looking at 70 million souls. They are not all going to feel the same way about everything. But people out there, you can see this in polling, you can see it just in any conversation that you ever have, are desperately frustrated that it feels like nothing works. That is the most common thing that people say to me is they will just say that. They'll just say, like, nothing works. And then they will tell me the specific tale of whatever it is that they have struggled with, whichever arm of the state they've struggled with to operate, or they struggled to operate. And I think that people completely understand that. And you do have to make the argument case by case, regulation by regulation. There are all sorts of instances where each individual regulation, I think Michael Gove used this phrase about the planning system, but it's actually true across the board, that the regulations are individually justifiable but collectively intolerable. And so you have to win each of those small arguments and the big argument, which is basically why politics is hard, right? Otherwise we would already have done this and it would be easy. But my view always is that people are smart. People know the truth when they hear it. And I think that the British people are absolutely ready to hear the truth that they already see all the time in their own lives, that the state does far too much. It tries to eliminate too much risk, that we have allowed that to get the better of being enterprising and trying things and being open to them failing, and then we can't go on like this. I think people know that to be true.
Can we press you on the flip side in terms of a more positive vision of the future? What the constituents might be of Katie Lamb's Britain decades hence. So easy one, nuclear power. Is that going to be there?
Oh, I cannot see. There are various different inputs into how we can really get the economy motoring again. But lower energy prices has got to be, if not top of the list, easily top 3, right? We've got the highest industrial energy prices in the developed world. I think the second highest domestic energy prices in the developed world. No economy has ever had a relative energy price like the price that we have now and grown in a meaningful way. And we are not going to be the first, right? That's not going to happen. The energy price has got to come down. The only way that I can see in the long term that you solve for price and security is to have tons of nuclear baseload. Intermittent forms of power like wind and solar, I think kind of makes sense at a domestic level, maybe. Like I can see why you might want solar panels on the roof of your factory or on the roof of your house or whatever it might be. But at the level of the country, if you want to just have all the power you need whenever you need it, I think you've got to have loads of nuclear baseload.
And in Lambtopia, will there be uncontrolled mass immigration?
Do you know? No. What's happened with immigration is probably the biggest broken promise in British politics, and there are lots of things that over the years politicians have said that they weren't going to do and did, or said that they were going to do and didn't do. Immigration, I think, is so egregious because it's so clear and quantitative, and so people can just see that. If you say you're going to take something down and instead you take it up, you've broken your promise, and people feel rightly very let down and very, very angry about that. And there are so many reasons. That, of course, is one of them. Why allowing so many people to come to our country has been a mistake. But one that I think is underweighted is how damaging it is for the economy, in particular where, we are moving to, or we should be moving to, certainly the world is moving to, a much more automated, technologically enabled way of doing things. I think we've built fewer industrial robots in this country than they have in Turkey or in Thailand. That is not a sustainable way to be, and that's partly because we have allowed the economy to become dependent on large volumes of low-paid work.
Is that not partly, though? I mean, to slightly push back, that was the desire of business, that the private sector said, and I can't remember who said it to us, but that if you even think about lowering immigration, it's not the Central Business Bank, who do I mean? It's the CBI, will come and howl at you and say, "Oh no, you'll destroy this economy."
Well, I mean, they will, but it doesn't make them right. And it wasn't just the private sector; it was also the public sector. I mean, probably the worst, the biggest single mistake that was made was introducing the health and social care visa, on which 6,000 people a year were predicted to come, and in 3 years, 600,000 people came, of whom more than half were dependents. The threshold salary for that visa when it was first introduced was something like £20,500. This is not coming to do high-paid, high-skilled work. Clearly, some people who have come over are, consultant surgeons, but it is a vanishingly small number. And the same is true on people who came to work in the private sector. There are, of course, some people who've come here who are physics professors who've come to run very high-end tech companies, but there aren't very many. And the mistake that lots of people made was conflating, and often, in my view, the mistake that they made was to conflate, this is quite a sort of urban urban successful professional mistake is to think, well, who are the people I know or the people that I work with who've come from other countries? And, when I worked at Goldman, lots and lots of the people there were French, or they were Italian, or they were German, and they had been to certain finance schools on the continent, and then they had come to London because it's the continent's financial capital, and they were all earning lots of money and definitely net fiscal contributors, but they were, in absolute terms and relative to immigration as a whole, a very, very small proportion of the people who came, and lots of organisations and businesses effectively made that mistake. And the government allowed themselves to be persuaded by that, and I think it was a terrible, terrible error.
And all this is done with a short-term goal in mind of plugging the holes in the economy, and it seems that the country's going to be picking up the bill for forever with warped voting patterns, migrant crime, all this kind of thing that I think a longer-term analysis might have spotted.
Well, the health and social care visa in lots of ways is the most literal version of this, where we effectively, not necessarily consciously, but we did effectively decide that we would rather have people that are basically underpaid. I mean, the fundamental problem is that we don't pay people enough to work in health and social care. And so the only way to get people who will do those roles for the amount of money that we're willing to pay is for them to be coming from abroad. And after they've been here just for 5 years, they're entitled to the full suite of, they're entitled to stay forever, and they're entitled to the full suite of British state support. The whole benefit system, the whole social housing system. There is no way mathematically that those people will be net fiscal contributors over their lifetime. But in the very short term, they mean that care home doesn't have to pay an extra £1 an hour for its staff. And so that's basically the sort of panic button that we pressed.
So what's the answer? Is it robotics, like robotic bum wipers and so on? There actually are, I think, probably quite a few roles that you could automate. Yeah, I don't know if we want to go all the way towards that. But I mean, in health and social care, in the end, for jobs that really do need to be done by people, they will just need to be paid more money, and that is a net saving for the country and for the system. It's just that because of how government is siloed and because of how people look at budgets and money, there's no incentive to do that. Not least because all of this is like very boring, really. But the way that the welfare budget is set, it's effectively uncapped. So the welfare is just paid to everybody who meets the criterion for that particular benefit. So if you are the DWP Secretary of State, you just get from the Treasury whatever you need to be paid in order to pay out the benefits that people are qualifying for. And there is no connection whatsoever to the health department and to health and social care. So even just the really dull elements of how the accounting works means that we incentivize short-termism and controlling, and in some ways excessively downwardly controlling the budgets that you can control. And in the end, it all just goes on the welfare bill.
This strikes me as, you mentioned it was an urban, educated attitude. I think it's actually quite a common one across the country, right? That we have to feel, immigration is a good thing. People need these jobs. My question is, what you're describing is basically a large-scale shift in people's views on basically everything. That people have held incorrect views on a lot of things. What does a change in the direction of the country look like? Do we need? I mean, the grooming gangs is a good example of the things that's forced some people to open up their eyes and confront the reality of this. But again, is there a constituency for this? Is my question.
For what?
To be honest, on the health and social care visa, do a lot of these people have to go home, for example? And is there going to be a constituency for that?
Well, I mean, under current government policy, under current Labour government policy, at the end of their visas, lots of people who've come here will not qualify for another one. And so, I mean, there will be various options open to them. They could move to another country. They could go back to the country that they originally came from, if that's what they want to do. But even this government, which is obviously a Labour government, has acknowledged that the conditions have to change. What you say about people changing their minds, I do think is quite limited to a certain demographic that tend to dominate a lot of the national conversation in the media. But most people out in the country have known this for a very long time. If you had asked most normal people 20 years ago, do you think that mass migration will deflate wages? They would have been like, obviously, yes. And for a long time, there was kind of consensus amongst academics that this wasn't true, that mass migration somehow drove wages up. And then eventually there was meta-analysis and meta-studies that were like, oh, well, maybe it's sort of neutral. And now eventually people are accepting what is, a very obvious mathematical reality, which is, of course, if you're going to bring loads and loads of people into the country who are willing to be paid a lot less money, you're going to deflate wages. So I think that there is a bit of a reckoning, but just amongst a number of people that's actually relatively small, but just very influential.
How do you explain the sort of green resurgence? Because I think that is a sort of core body of people who really can't agree with that or feel very strong. And that's often not, I mean, I was going to say sort of well-paid, middle class, but, often they are educated and they are educated enough to be dangerous, I suppose.
Well, like with all parties, there are different groups of people who vote Green and who lean Green, or who would currently say in a poll, I would vote for the Greens. As we saw in Gorton and Denton, sometimes that's actually just a sectarian problem. For some people, and of course, again, like I was saying earlier, the British people are not a monolith. There are people who are very pro, who effectively think that borders of any kind are oppressive. I think those people are currently being drawn to the Greens. And then there is a general sense across the country, understandably, of having been let down by politics and the political system. And so people going to parties that are neither Labour nor the Conservatives because they feel let down. But I think the idea, if the suggestion is all of those people who are currently today saying I would vote Green in a general election are ardently pro-mass migration, I think that's very unlikely.
I suppose we're getting more of a sense of what the Lamb vision might be regarding kind of energy immigration. I'd also like to know what you'd like to keep about British life. What is actually working?
Well, there's loads about British life. It's only the British state that's the problem. There's loads about British life that works fantastically well. My constituency is an unbelievably gorgeous chunk of the Kentish countryside. It's all medieval churches and cricket clubs and all of that works amazingly well. Our individual communities and villages work wonderfully well. The English and then British, but it's a way of life that's existed in England even longer than in the whole country. Sort of mutual society works fantastically well. A group of people who live alongside one another, who don't know each other to begin with. It's not broadly a society that's based on big kind of extended family relationships. It's a group of people who end up in the same place, who might be colleagues, or they might have children at the same school, or they're interested in the same thing, and so they set up a little ukulele choir or a painting club, or that way of life is absolutely wonderful. It doesn't need to be improved. It just needs to be allowed to be what it is. And again, as I was saying earlier, it's still the British people are still incredibly innovative, talented at thinking of new things. The government just needs to get out of their way.
Yeah, it feels like everything has to change in terms of the state and the economy and the preservation of the kind of pristineness of Antarctica. All this stuff has to change for everything to stay the same, basically, for us to be able to like preserve these long-standing, uplifting ways of life.
Yeah, and that fundamentally, to me, that is conservatism. That's what's exciting and right about conservatism is, like I was saying earlier, is knowing what is infinitely precious. You know, what is the king on the chessboard, and then understanding how all of the other pieces can be moved around and taken off the board in some cases. But knowing what is fundamental and changing everything that might need to be changed to protect it.
Some people might say that form of life has been not fully destroyed, but really damaged by the last, let's say, 20 years. Is your view that it is just, like seeds in a drought, when watered, can then spring up again? I admit I find myself sometimes deeply depressed.
Blackpilling.
I am blackpilling. I find myself deeply depressed by, largely, I went and played cricket with my cricket club and we were actually destroyed very soundly by sort of 16-year-old Afghan refugee, which was the real moment that made me think, oh God, it's all over.
They're taking our jobs.
Exactly.
That's so lovely.
No, maybe I'm being unfair. It was a deeply humiliating defeat. No, I fear that the world that people want to conserve is destroyed, that the villages are falling apart, that people are leaving, there aren't the children there, and I am blackpilling. Can you give me a moment of hope?
I mean, we should have asked about the birth rate. Well, this is so fundamental to all these problems. But in Westminster, you probably feel like a crank if you're saying everyone needs to have 5 kids now. That should be the kind of central plank of government policy.
Yeah, and given all of the time that we spent about talking the limitations of government, I don't think getting everybody to have 5 kids now is
a little hypocritical to come around that.
Within
knocking at your
their
door
scope or ability. I mean, oh God, there's a whole conversation to be had about the birth rate. Just on the blackpilling very briefly, the short answer is no. I don't think that the country is destroyed. I think, and I don't even think it's kind of shriveled seeds in the drought. I mean, if you came to my home, it's all there right now, and it's wonderful right now. I think a lot of our cities and towns, and particularly bigger towns, do now really suffer from the kind of crime and grime. I think that there is a strong low-level background hum of things just not being very nice and not getting better. But there are all sorts of things that you could do about that, that mostly relate basically to the police and law enforcement, which has become incredibly bureaucratic and involves a lot of time wasting and should actually be, they should be almost entirely out on the beat, which we know both intuitively and empirically is what drives down crime and antisocial behaviour is visible policing. On the birth rate, I think it is definitely possible that a growing economy and just a greater sense of hope and ambition and excitement for the future makes people feel better about bringing more people, new people into the world. But a slowing birth rate happens in basically every economy as it develops. I think there are problems with the planning system, there are space constraints. It is very expensive to have children. In my view, I also think, and this is a cultural thing, that parents feel a huge amount of pressure to spend a lot of time with their children, to give a huge amount of attention to their children. And there's only so many children that you can sustain that for, because there's only so many hours in the day. And, lots of, if I think about my parents and all that they did, like driving us between like music lessons and orchestra and extra lessons and all of the things that we wanted to do outside of school, there's a lot less latchkey kid life now, I think. But that's also been happening for decades. But there are very few, I think potentially no, public policy interventions that have ever taken place anywhere in the world that have actually been shown to raise the birth rate. And I think there are various things about the changing demographic shape of the country that we will just have to accept. But certainly, if nobody can afford to have kids and nobody can afford to have a spare bedroom, and everybody feels that things are getting worse and that the future is going to be darker than the past, that cannot be encouraging people to have loads and loads of kids.
Well, in the other scenario, something like the 19th century, when our birth rate was so high that we now have Australia, the US, Canada, all speaking English, and the world that is very much influenced by the English-speaking people at the time. So it was maybe.
And now we have Dubai because we're exporting.
Now we have Dubai. We're going to have to wrap up, but one more very important question: would you describe yourself as an Anglo-futurist?
Well, what is an Anglo-futurist?
She's got us there. She's got us there.
I suppose, someone so enthusiastic about the future of the country thinks that there are essential things that ought to be preserved, often via the adoption of exciting new technology. So, we record in the kind of Thatched space station, and that is in some ways representative of Anglo-futurism. So it's like a country that is kind of striving to be great, but to be recognisable.
I love it. I think it sounds wonderful. Yeah.
Got that one in the bag then. We can go home then.
Oh, well, thank you, Kate. It's been great having you on the show.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you, listeners. And we will leave you here. Goodbye.